Hello everybody and welcome to the I Am IT Geek YouTube channel. My name is Shabazz Dan, I am the IT Geek. So welcome to what is episode 5 of the Azure Identity and Access Management series. Before I jump into this episode, I want to give a quick recap on episode 4, which was last week. And that was part 1 of the Azure AD Hybrid topic. So in last week's episode, I started off by discussing what hybrid Azure AD is and what it entails. I then explained how hybrid Azure AD works and how it works with wider services in both on-premises Active Directory and Azure AD. This led on to Azure AD Connect, and I explained exactly what this is and some of the topologies it supported, like the single forest synchronizing with a single Azure AD tenant, and also the multiple forests synchronizing with one Azure AD tenant. And finally, we went through some of the features of Azure AD Connect, like password hash sync, pass-through authentication, and some of the ADFS options. And that leads us on nicely to episode 5, which is part 2 of the Azure AD Hybrid topic. And in this week's episode, again, it's very similar to how I did the Azure AD part 2. It's going to be a demo, so it might be a bit longer than last week. I'll try and keep it as short as possible, but make sure I've got enough detail in. So I'm going to go through a demo of installing Azure AD Connect on a domain controller, and initially I'll do a password hash sync. Once we've done that, I'll show how to do password authentication. And once the password authentication is complete and working, I'll then show some high-level features of what of the ADFS configuration you can do with Azure AD Connect. I've not got ADFS set up, so I'm not going to be able to go through the full sort of demo there. But again, if anyone wants to see that in a later video, I'll be happy to create some content around that. So before I jump onto my domain controller, to start the configuration, just wanted to quickly jump into the actual tenant just to show you the first few kind of steps that you really need to complete before you start configuring. So as you can see, I'm in my I Am IT Geek tenant there, because that's the domain that I'll be configuring for the Azure AD Connect. I've gone down to Azure AD Connect here. As you can see, this is just showing, that it's not installed yet, just to prove that I need to download it. I've already downloaded it, and the install file's copied onto my domain controller, which I'll show shortly. It just shows there that the sync has never run as well, and it shows there that it's disabled. So it's important to keep note of these settings, because once we've configured it installed, it will show, that'll obviously change, that'll show to being installed, that'll hopefully be a few minutes, and that'll also show enabled. So when you click on that, it takes you to a Microsoft download page, which then I can download the Azure AD Connect sync exe file, and then I've copied that onto my domain controller. So I'll jump onto the domain controller now, and we can start the configuration. So here we are on my domain controller, which is just a virtual machine that I've got. And you can see here, this is the iamitgeek.com domain, and I've got a set of OUs here. This is the one we're going to be syncing, the Azure Sync OU. In here I've got another users OU, and there I've got some test users, which are currently not in my tenant. So these are going to be our first hybrid users. Just to show you here, this is the Azure AD Connect sync tool. So I'm going to start off by installing this. Drag that over here so we can see it. So we're just going to start installing all the services, and the install's pretty straightforward. It's just a next job. The configuration will come once it's installed, and we can start going on with the customized installation. So I just wanted to skip the installation just so I could get that done, because it's taking a bit of time, and get us on to launching the Azure AD Connect tool. So this is the first screen you should see when you launch it. So we've got two options here. We've got either using Express settings, or we can customize. So as I mentioned, the express settings, default settings are password hash sync. And although we want to set that up, and that's what we're going to set up in this part of the video, I'm going to click on customize just so I can show you some of the settings and components required. So here, as you can see, you can specify custom installation location. That's where the default one is. I'm just going to leave it there. You can use an existing SQL server. We don't have one in this instance, so we'll just allow it to install it. You can use an existing service account, which again I don't have, so I'm going to allow it to create one for me. You can specify custom sync groups, which we're going to leave for now. Or we can import synchronization settings, and this is the first time we're doing it, so we're not going to do that either. So we just click on install. It's going to do all the component installs that we need. It's doing the SQL Server Express at the moment. So again, I'm going to skip this part, and then when we get to the next window, I will show you what we need to do. So once it's installed all the components, the next screen we come to is the user sign-in. So here we want to select the sign-on method. Just going to hover over that. That explains a little bit about the hybrid identity authentication. So I'm just going to quickly read that. Authentication is what allows your users and groups to access cloud resources. The authentication method you choose will determine whether Azure manages the authentication or this is done on premises. So again, just quickly look at the password hash sync and the other options as well to show you what they all mean. So password hash synchronization, this option allows your users to sign into the cloud using the same password that they use on premises. Password hash synchronization does not store or send clear text passwords. So in this first instance, we're going to install that and configure that, but I just want to click on the other ones. Pass-through authentication, which we've already discussed. Pass-through authentication enables Azure Active Directory to authenticate users using your on-premises identity infrastructure. So whereas, again, you're using the same password as well, but the authentication is done on premises. So there's a reliance on your Active Directory control on premises with pass-through authentication. So let's quickly look at federation with ADFS. Federation with ADFS, this option allows your users to do federated signing using ADFS. While logged into the corporate network, your users can access cloud resources without entering their passwords again. Azure AD Connect manages only settings related to Azure AD Trust and does not modify any settings on other relying party trusts in ADFS. So what that's essentially saying is that if you've got any other trusts with ADFS configured for other services that are outside Azure and Microsoft 365, this tool does not deal with those. It only deals with the trust with Azure AD. So a couple more options. Federation with Ping Federate. This option enables federated users sign in using Ping Federate. While logged into the corporate network, users can access cloud resources without entering their password. So again, it's just another federation, another aspect of federation there. Do not configure, that's quite self-explanatory. And then enabling single sign-on, which we are going to click on as well. So we're going to leave it on password hash sync. We're going to click on enabling single sign-on. So again, just this option enables users on the corporate network to get a single sign-on experience when accessing cloud services from their domain joined desktop machines. Essentially, when you log on to Microsoft 365 or Azure AD, it'll auto sign you in because it'll trust the username and password you're logged into the machine with. So I'm going to click on that. We're going to click on next. So connect to Azure AD, enter your Azure AD Global Administrator credentials. So we're going to do that for our IAM IT Geek domain. And then we're going to put the password in, which obviously I'm not going to tell you. And we click on next. And I hope I've put the right password in, obviously. So that's trying to connect. It's going to examine the domain that I've logged in with and the credentials. And now that's authenticated, so great. So now what we need to do, we're going to connect to our on-premises directory. So enter connection information for your on-premises directories or forest. So if I click on that, it's the only option we've got. And this is where I need to put in the forest name, which I already have done. And there I need to click on add directory. So here, as I mentioned, this is the service account that it's going to want. Actually, this is the domain admin. This is the enterprise admin account. Apologies. So we're going to have to put in the enterprise admin user here, but here it's going to create us a new service account. So let's just quickly read this. An AD account with a sufficient permissions is required for periodic synchronization. Azure AD Connect can create the account for you. Alternatively, you may provide an existing account with the required permissions. So this is a service account that's going to run Azure AD, the Sync Connect. So the first option is recommended and requires you to enter your enterprise administrator credentials. So let's go ahead and do that. Put in the domain before it, my apologies. So that has added the directory, and one important thing to note is make sure you authenticate with an account that has enterprise administrative access. So not just domain admin, it needs to be enterprise admin, so make sure you select the appropriate account to authenticate with. Click on next, and this is going to retrieve the schema. And here you can see it's because we've already got the IAM IT Geek domain UPN suffix added in both on-premises and Azure AD, the domain's gone verified. Be careful when you can't add local domains, so any domain that's not publicly resolvable will not work. So if you do .local or those sort of domains, they cannot be verified. And obviously to be verified, you need to make sure the domain exists in both as a UPN suffix in Active Directory on premises, and it's a domain that you have added to your Azure AD tenant as well. We showed the custom domains in one of the previous videos, so you'd have to add that through that way. So quickly just look here. So select the on-premises attribute to use as your Azure AD username. So we've got a whole set of options here. That I said, the default and standard is normally the user principal name. But for whatever reason, you can use any of these sort of options here. I'm going to stick with the user principal name, the UPM, and then we'll click on next. Now here's where we get to choose the OU that we want to sync. So if you leave it on the default, it'll use all from the top level down. So you can see, if click on, let's click on it, but essentially the whole domain, all my OUs. I obviously created the OU specifically, so I'm going to untick that, go down in the hierarchy, and I'm going to select Azure Sync OU because that has my users OU in it. And then if I want to create any more further down the line for computers or anything like that, etc., I can. They will automatically be synced because I'm choosing the top level Azure Sync OU. So we're going to go to next there because that's what we want to do. And here, do we want to configure any uniquely anything to identify our users? So again, the default is the mail attribute, and to select how users should be identified with Azure AD, the default is let Azure manage the source anchor. So for this instance, I'm going to leave that as all default because I don't have any requirement for these other configurations. But again, it's worth looking into what these others are if you have that requirement. But 9 times out of 10, the use case is sufficient enough for the mail attribute and for Azure to manage the source anchor. So I'll click on that. Next. Again, do we want to filter any users or devices? No, I've only got 2 users in this instance, but there might be some times where you want to review that. So if you choose to synchronize selected, so you use this option to pilot Azure AD Connect for a small group. So if you're just testing it, this is obviously mine's just a demo tenant, so I don't need to do that. So I can just sync. I've only got 2 users in there, so it's not going to be a big deal. So just click on next. Here's some optional features. So if you've got an Exchange on premises set up and you want to do a hybrid deployment, you can do it from here. If it's public folders, which if you do have, some clients do have, you can select to select those. This is obviously unticked because there's a requirement that I'm obviously missing. I don't have Exchange for starters on premises. You can do Azure AD app and attribute filtering. As you can see, their password hash sync is already ticked. Password write back, I think I showed this in one of my previous videos as well. If you want to configure that, this outside the scope of this video, but I think I've already shown that in a previous video. group write back and device write back as well. Again, I'm obviously missing the one of the requirements for that, so and again it's outside the scope of this video. And then if you want any directory extension attribute sync, but again, mine's very straightforward. We only want password hash sync for this video, so I'm going to click on next. And then this is take me to, if you remember on one of the previous choices and previous screens, we enable single sign-on. So it's already got a green tick on for the forest is already configured, so I don't need to enter my credentials again. I've already authenticated with my enterprise admin account, so I'll just click on next, and that will now start to configure once I click install. So this is just a summary of what we've configured, and here you can if you leave that ticked, it'll start to synchronize straight away, which is what we want. Or if you want to tick that as well, you can enable staging mode. So when selected, synchronization will not export any data to AD or Azure AD. Again, that's not our use case in this instance. We want to start synchronizing straight away. So I'm going to click on install, and then when that's finished, I'll show you some of the settings in Azure AD once it's synchronized, and I'll be able to show you the users that are also up there that have synchronized. So I'm going to click on install, and now it's going to verify and go through the install. So that took about 5 minutes or so, but as you can see here, the configuration is complete. This just shows us some of the settings. So it just says the configuration is complete. You can now log into Azure Office 365 portal to verify that the user accounts have synced. It gives us a couple of other warnings here around the attributes that have synced, and some recommendations around recycling bin. So what I'll do is I'll exit this, and then I will log into the Azure tenant, and we'll have a look at some of our synced users. As you can see, I'm back in the IAM IT Geek Azure AD tenancy, and I'm on the window menu for Azure AD Connect, and straight away you can see the sync status is showing as enabled, the last sync is showing less than an hour ago, and the password hash sync is now showing enabled, whereas before it was disabled, and this was asking me to download, and that was saying never synced. So straight away you can see the sync has worked. I want to quickly jump back into the Microsoft 365 portal. Just going to click on users so we can have a look at active users to see have our users actually synced. So if you remember, there were two users, test 1 and test 2, or test user 1 and test user 2 should I say. So we'll just let this load, and I'm quite confident you should see, there we go, test user 1, test user 2, excellent. Now obviously these are unlicensed at the moment. One thing you can't see, which I'm just going to again hop back into the Active Directory, Azure Active Directory portal. Click on users. What I just want to show you is the two users that have synchronized their status. So for cloud users, you might have noticed in previous videos it has them down as cloud members. Here we're going to see something slightly different. So if I click on test user 1. Let that load. We should see what their status is. And here we can see their source. So their source is Windows Server AD. So that's different from the other cloud users. So again, I'll just go back into Active Directory and the users, and just show you a comparison with my cloud account and the difference. And this should load. Let's move across here. There we go, sorry. So the difference is that we've got test user 1 and test user 2. Directory synced, yes, yes. Shabazz-Dar, no. No Shabazz-Dar, no. The admin, no. Another account for a friend of mine, Simon Lee. Directory synced, no. So those are cloud only accounts. So we'll just click on Shabazz at iamitgeek.com just to show you the source is different. The other one said Azure AD. This one says, sorry, this one says Azure Active Directory. The other one said Windows. So that's just the difference between the two synchronized accounts and a cloud account. So that was the basic install with password hash sync setup. What I'd like to do now is move on to pass-through authentication setup and show you how we do this. So here we are back on my domain controller on premises, my virtual machine, and I've launched the Azure AD Connect tool. So again, this is the sort of welcome screen we get, and it's just a quick warning that it gives you just to say that the synchronization service schedule is suspended until this wizard is closed. So while this is open, there'll be no synchronization. So just one thing that you need to know. We have two options. We can either configure or we can exit. We obviously don't want to exit, so we'll click on configure. We've got a lot of options here. I'm going to go through them all later on in the video, but for now, just want to show you how to enable pass-through authentication. So we're going to click on change user sign-in, because essentially that's what we're doing. We're changing it from password hash sync to pass-through authentication. So we're going to click on next on that. We have to obviously authenticate, so that's just my global admin username and my password that I entered. That's just going to do the connection to Microsoft Online, and there we go. And this is similar to the screen we saw when we were originally configuring password hash synchronization. So what we want to do is here we want to click on pass-through authentication. So again, just a quick warning, if you read this at the bottom, we recommend shabazz@iamITgeek.com be a cloud-only company administrator account, so that this account is able to manage pass-through authentication in the event of an on-premises failure. So essentially it's telling me that the account that I used to authenticate earlier for my global admin should be a cloud-only account. So make sure you keep that in mind when you're planning your configuration, that keep your global admin as a cloud-only rather than a synchronized account, a hybrid account. So this is going to obviously remove the password hash sync, and we're going to go on to pass-through authentication. So we'll click on next. We don't need to do this again because it's got the green tick on it already. So we've already verified our on-premises domain and the administrator account, the enterprise admin account. This is just going to make sure all the components are installed correctly and that we're ready to configure. It should move on to, yep. So again, the same sort of screen we saw before, where it's going to install the authentication agent, which I'm going to go into a little bit more once it is synchronizing. It's going to enable pass-through, enable the managed authentication in Azure. It's going to enable password hash sync, even though that's already enabled. It's going to enable that as part of a configuration as well, if you're doing it for the first time, but we've already enabled it. So I'm going to click on configure. What I want to quickly do now, while that's configuring, I want to jump back into the Azure AD portal just to show you a little about the pass-through agents you can do for kind of the HA sort of authentication. So here we are back in the IAM IT Geek Azure Active Directory tenancy, and we're back down on Azure AD Connect again. And here you can see the pass-through authentication. The one agent has been installed on as part of my default configuration that I just did. But one thing to note, which is what I want to discuss, is for the high availability configuration, what you can do is you can install agents on other virtual machines or other servers. So what that does is, if you remember, with pass-through authentication, there's a high reliance on your on-premises infrastructure, because Active Directory on premises is what does the authentication with pass-through. So if you were to lose that, if I was to lose that domain controller, my authentication would be cut off for my synchronized users. So if I install multiple agents on different virtual machines or different Windows servers, that gives me high availability. So if I do lose my domain controller, my users who are synced can still authenticate. So I definitely, that is something you want to take into consideration, and it's a recommendation, I believe, of mine anyway, that you should try and get multiple agents installed. So that was a little bit on how to get the pass-through authentication set up using Azure AD Connect. What we'll do is we'll move on now, and I'll just go through some of the ADFS setup options. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I don't have any other, I don't have the ADFS setup within my demo tenant, so I will just be doing a high-level overview of the options you've got in Azure AD Connect. So let's jump back over to my domain controller and take a look. So here we are back on my domain controller, and we are here, we're in the Azure AD Connect software here. And again, the same warning we saw previously, just saying that the synchronization scheduler is suspended while this is running. Just click on configure. Again, I'm going to go quickly overview of these settings in a few minutes. Just want to quickly go into the ADFS settings. So we've got to change user sign-in again. Click on next, and I'll put in my Azure AD global admin credentials here. So that's verified and signed me in. Again, here you can see the password authentication is already ticked because that was the last thing we configured. So what we're going to click is we're going to select Federation with ADFS. Like I mentioned, I can't go through all these settings unfortunately because I don't have an ADFS farm set up. But if we just have a look at the bottom here, so this is essentially telling us what we're going to do. It's saying we will install or use an existing Active Directory Federation Services or ADFS farm. You must have the following. A server 2012 R2 or later for the actual Federation server, which will sit on premises. The same level server at least, so Windows Server 2012 R2 or later for your web application proxy server. So that'll sit within your DMZ normally. And here you also need an SSL certificate with your Federation service name. So it gives you a Contoso example there, but mine could be fs.iamitgeek.com. We don't have any of these as I mentioned, but I'm still going to click on next just to give you an idea of some of the options you have. So this one's my on-premises administrator, my domain admin. So that's the login details there. Click on next, let it verify and log me in. So again, we can either configure a new ADFS farm if we want to, if we're doing it for the first time, or we can use an existing one. When you click on existing one, you just need to put the server name there. You can browse your on-premises AD to find the server name. And then what you do is once you've selected that, you do the Azure AD domain part, it configures and it verifies the connectivity. As I mentioned, I don't have any of these. If you do want to see this full configuration step by step, please do let me know. And I'll do a video around that. I'll quickly mock up an ADFS farm, and I can go through these settings and we can configure that. So I'm just going to move back to the tasks. Just want to quickly overview some of these. Again, I'm not going to go into configuration of any of these. I'm just going to explain what they are. So privacy settings. These are the settings that are shared with between Azure AD and Active Directory on premises. So if I put in my global admin account details there. So this tells us essentially Azure AD Connect collects application telemetry and component health data by default. You can change what data is shared with Microsoft by updating your privacy settings below. So we've got two options. We've got Azure AD Health and application telemetry. For Azure AD Health, it collects data to help you monitor and gain insights into your on-premises synchronization services. You must visit Azure AD Health portal to review or change what data is collected. So we can't actually do that through Azure AD Connect. We need to log into the portal and do it from there. But what we can amend is this application telemetry. So this collects anonymous data that helps Microsoft understand how you use Azure AD Connect. So I can either enable or disable that just by the tick of that box there. We don't want to do that in this instance. Let's move back. Here we can, if we want to move our Azure AD Connect services to a different server, we can export it first here by clicking on this. So we can obviously review all the settings there, and then we can export the settings to a file, and we can import that to another instance of Azure AD Connect once this is uninstalled. So I'm going to remove that. This lets us customize the settings we did right at the beginning when we first installed this tool. So if I just click on there, put in my global admin credentials, which is easy to pretty much on every option. And again, these are the directory settings, the domain OU filtering, which we did before. So I can select another OU if I wanted to. Again, we have the optional features around password write back and Azure AD app and attribute filtering. You know, if I had an Exchange server, I could do a hybrid deployment and so on. So we've seen those settings already. Going to move back. So here we can configure device hybrid options. So I'm going to quickly go into this. I'm not going to configure anything, but this gives us the two options. So here's a quick overview. So we've got two types of device management synchronization we can do. So I'll quickly read this overview. With device management in Azure AD, you can ensure that users are accessing your resources from devices that meet your standards for security and compliance. So I mentioned Azure AD Join, Hybrid Join before. So this is where you have, it enables devices in your Active Directory forest to register with Azure AD for access management. I've not gone through that configuration in this part or in this video, but again, I'm happy to create a video around that and how you hybrid Azure AD join a Windows 10 device, because there's some group policy settings, there's some settings in Azure AD we need to do. So essentially this is telling us computers in our organization will automatically discover Azure AD using a service connection point, or an SCP object that's created in your Active Directory forest. So that's for the Azure AD join part. This can also configure a device write back as the other option. It's a prerequisite for enabling on-premises conditional access using ADFS and Windows Hello for Business. So device write back synchronizes all devices registering Azure AD back to on-premises. So again, they have to be registered in Azure AD first, and that'll write it back to on-premises. Devices are synchronized to a device container that is created in your Active Directory forest. So those are two options we have. I'm not going to configure those in this video. So if we've updated our schema, we can refresh it here. If we want to configure staging mode, so again, I'll just quickly put in my credentials again just to go through this. So when staging mode is enabled, no data changes will be exported to Azure AD or on-premises AD DS. Password write back and password hash synchronization will also be disabled. So this is almost like a testing mode. So if you enable this, you can just test the synchronization without it actually synchronizing. So again, we don't want to do that for this instance. Change user sign-in, we've already been on this. We can enable password, hash sync, pass-through authentication, ADFS. This lets us, if we've got a pre-config, if we've already got Federation enabled, this lets us manage it. And this is a really helpful troubleshooting tool you can use if you're having synchronization problems. So that's the gist of the Microsoft Azure AD Active Directory Connect tool and some of the additional tasks you can do around that. So that is kind of the demo of Azure AD Connect, really. So those were the ADFS setup options we had. Again, it was a very high level overview just because I don't have an ADFS farm set up at the moment. As I mentioned a few times, if that's something you want to see, I'm happy to do some content around that. I can create a farm and I can show you how the configuration works. So just that is pretty much the end of the episode. So I just wanted to go a quick summary. So we installed Azure AD Connect. We did the basic setup first, and we looked at password hash synchronization. I then configured pass-through authentication and showed that in the portal as well. We then looked at ADFS options, and I also looked at the overview of the tool and additional tasks that you can complete. And then, yeah, as I said, I gave an overview of the configuration as well. So thank you very much for watching this episode. I hope it's been useful. I hope you've learned something. If you did like it, please do give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Hit me up on Twitter if you've got any recommendations or any feedback around my YouTube videos. I am very thankful for everyone's support. So until next time, goodbye.